Russia has the ability to strike Ukraine throughout the depth of its territory. There's not a place in Ukraine that cannot be struck by Russia. Now, Russia has shown great restraint in exercising this. This isn't a war. I'm just telling people straight up, having fought a war that included as part of it a strategic air campaign against Iraq, having participated in the targeting of Iraq and understanding why we strike certain places, I can tell you right now that Ukraine has not been subjected to a strategic air campaign. It simply has not. It's ludicrous to imply otherwise. Russia has carried out aspects of a strategic air campaign. We got workmen in the back, and they're doing their thing. And if the dogs don't shut up soon, we might have to pause so I can go shut them up. But and now they're all moving in that direction. This could either become quiet, which hopefully it is, or it will explode. But the point is, here you are over 2 years into this conflict, and Ukraine has lost. They're not going to win. And yet Zelensky feels obligated to come up with a victory plan, having been told. I mean, he's been given a script the whole time that says he's the Winston Churchill of Ukraine. He's the leader of the free world. Hell, everywhere he goes, he gets standing ovations. British Parliament, American Congress, European Parliament. He's treated, wined and dined, and told that, Ukraine is the essential issue of our time. This is the battle for democracy over evil. And he's believing all this stuff. And so he's sitting there saying, I need to win. I need weapons that outclass the Russian weapons. I mean, that's what he's been asking for the whole time. Just give me the weapons that outclass the Russian weapons so that I can hurt Russia like Russia is hurting me. And the West is saying, well, that was never part of the equation. You were supposed to be the proxy that was going to bring harm to Russia, to wear Russia down, to try and get Russia to collapse from within. But you were never going to win this fight. We were never going to. There's no condition that we can accept, that we can tolerate, that would have you win this fight, because in order for you to win this fight, we have to assist you in the strategic defeat of Russia, a nuclear armed power that will kill all of us in the process. And the message never sunk in for Zelensky. And so here he is trying to come up with a plan, and it's logical. I have to say, if I were in his shoes, I would tell my so-called allies, I need to do to Russia what Russia's doing to me in order to level the playing field. And I believe that because Russia doesn't want to engage in this is Zelensky's perspective, Russia doesn't want to engage in that level of fighting, that the potential to strike Russia in that nature would compel Russia to negotiate it into this war. So give me the weapons I need. And because this is an act of desperation, he literally is either doing a Google search or, reading something. He says, I want the Tomahawk, not knowing that America doesn't give the Tomahawk to anybody. I think the British may have a couple, but other than that, we don't dole it out to NATO. It's an American system. And he had a conversation at the White House where he put this out. And he thought it was in confidence, as it should be. I mean, to be honest, it should be. He's the president of Ukraine. Maybe, he hasn't had an election, but, he's the president. We treat him as such. We recognize him as such. He comes and he has an executive to executive level discussion. The next thing you know, he's reading about it in the New York Times in a mocking way, as if the United States is saying, what the hell is this guy thinking? So the empathy that comes out is, I almost feel sorry for him, because he's put in this impossible situation. He cannot win this war. He will not win this war. And yet he's told he can't quit. He's told he has to keep the fight up. He has to keep going. They're going to keep putting the IV in and dripping this military aid. And all that's happening is his army is being decimated. The Ukrainians just announced they're going to mobilize 160,000 additional troops. Where they're going to get them is another question. And how they're going to train them is another question. And what they're going to equip them with is another question. And then by the time all that happens, where the front lines will be is another question. But they're not talking about walking away from this conflict. They're not talking about finding an off-ramp. They're talking about doubling down. 160,000 new pieces of fresh meat. They're going to be thrown into the meat grinder that Russia is 100% in control of. And I think maybe the thought process was, if we being the United States leak this information, that we will confront Zelensky with the absurdity of his views, and maybe that would compel him. And you see, I mean, the anger, the frustration, the exasperation that's in him. I mean, he's like, why would they do this? This was supposed to be a confidential conversation. Well, because it's the theater of the absurd now, Zelensky, and you are the tragic comic figure. You're no longer Winston Churchill. You're the bumbling idiot, that is the world's looking at now and mocking, openly mocking. And he needs to recognize the reality of this new role he's playing, and maybe decide he doesn't want to play this role anymore. But the fact of the matter is, the support that Ukraine believes it needs to be able not only to continue this conflict, but to prevail in this conflict, isn't there, and it never will be there.
To me, it's like him finally realizing that the Biden team, they're just pimps, and you're nothing but a prostitute. You know what I mean? That's all it is. And the prostitute, they gets hooked on, they deliberately hook her on drugs, which may be an appropriate metaphor when it comes to him, but they get hooked on drugs. They, are they going to buy you some pretty clothes? Sure. They ain't buying you pretty clothes because they want you to look nice. They're buying you pretty clothes because they're making money. You are nothing but a means to an end. And at some point, when you're too strung out on drugs, and now you're getting a little older and you've gained weight, as they say, the bloom is off the rose, another potential moneymaker comes along. At some point, you've served your purpose. And he still thinks that he's the pretty young prostitute that he was when they first recruited him in, and that he's important to him. They got Israel now. They got other bigger fish to fry and other things going on. And he's still going there saying, look, I could make money for you. Buy me Gucci and buy me, Pierre Cardin, buy me all of this stuff, and I'll still attract it, and I'll still make money. And they're like, we got new things to do. You're getting kind of old. Move on. And at some point, maybe the Ukrainians at some point wake up and realize they were nothing but prostitutes. They were nothing but a means to an end. And when the pimp gets done with the prostitutes, throws them aside, they can go to jail. They can go to a halfway house. They can get buried it doesn't matter. These people are going to, in the same way that that the neocons have no love or empathy for the Russians. Actually, I think they got even less for the Ukrainians. And for a guy like him, they probably even have less respect for him because he's willing to turn his own people over. At least the Russians will fight. You know what I mean? People, whenever they see somebody help them a means to an end, they always have less respect for the traitor that works for them than they actually do for their enemy. For the spy that turns on his own people, they respect that person. They respect the guy who says, you'll have to kill me, but I ain't talking. They'll respect that soldier. They have no respect for the guy that says, sure, just give me some money and some girls and some drugs, and I'll tell you anything I want about my own people.
Yeah, he to use your analogy, he thinks he's Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman, that movie, and he's waiting for Richard Gere to come driving down in the stretched limo, to take her away from this life. But he's just a washed up old whore, is what he is, and doesn't excite us anymore, doesn't bring anything to the table, and there ain't enough lipstick and Gucci to wrap around this thing to make it attractive. And now we're going to get in all sorts of trouble for this analogy, but that's what it is. I mean, because he sold out. I mean, he had a price, and his price was met, and they used him. He played the role because prostitution's acting. You're supposed to, you're being paid to play a role.
Good point.
He's an actor. He was paid to play a role, and now they're tired of it. He's not believable in that role anymore. He's not useful. They want something new, and I mean, and the thing for Zelensky, though, there is no halfway house ending for him. There is no retirement. There's too much blood on this man's hands. and I don't see this ending well for him at all. And I think you see the look in his eyes. This is a man who realizes he's a cornered animal, and
And he knows
he's
too
either
much.
going. Pardon?
That's the other problem. And he knows too much. You know what I mean? You know how it is. Let me
Yeah,
tell
he
you,
knows far too
the
much. They're
worst
not
thing.
going to let him write the book. He doesn't get to write Zelensky the memoir. And he is going to end up. My guess is, seeing how much he's bought into this, I think he's going to play the presidential role to the bitter end, and he's going to end up in a courtyard in some police station in a Kiev suburb, lined up against the wall and shot. That's his future. Or he's going to be in a vehicle trying to escape, and they're just going to riddle it full of holes. For the sake of his family, get the hell out of Ukraine right now while you can. Find a villa and try to live a quiet life. But the idea that this is Zelensky brand is something that the world, that they keep Navalny's widow out there on because she's totally harmless. The Russians don't care about her at all. They don't feel threatened about her. Also, the West trots her out there and they interview her and she says things and nobody cares. So she's safe. But Leon Trotsky, on the other hand, we saw what happened to him. He fled, went to Mexico, continued to write, and because there was, if you study the history of the creation of the Soviet Union, you'll know that there were competing factions within the Bolshevik Party, within the Mensheviks, and such. And he had continued sway in certain areas, and they put an ice pick in his head because they couldn't let him live. They couldn't let him continue to go on as this symbol. Zelensky won't live. I'm afraid to say it. He is literally a dead man walking. And what is
They
the only
can't,
thing?
Scott, I'll throw this in. They can't have this guy running around after it's all over when someone says, so tell me what happened. Well, Jake Sullivan came to Kiev and remember this happened? Well,
Yeah.
that was a lie. He told me this. And Burns, and you know what? I got a call from so-and-so and they said, say this, but what we're really, they can't have this guy doing that.
No.
That Scott, he never realized that ain't the way it works. At
Why
the
do you think?
end, huh?
Why do you think there's MI6 bodyguards surrounding him?
Exactly.
It ain't to protect him. It's to make sure that when the moment comes, they know where every document is, every recording is, every shred of evidence is, and that this gets packed up and is never to see the light. We will not, I believe, learn the truth about what happened in the inner sanctum of Ukraine, because everybody around him will be dead too.
Yeah,
I
of
mean,
course.
Arestovich is out there speaking, but he was, even though he speaks as an insider, he was never really an insider's insider. He wasn't at the right hand. He was on the periphery. But the guys, Yermak, you think Yermak's going to get to write his memoir? You think Bunov is going to get to write his memoir? These are all dead men. These are dead men because the scope and scale of the corruption that's at play here. That's the one thing the West really doesn't want to have to acknowledge, is just all this money we put in. It's not that the Ukrainians were corrupt. I think the West is willing to accept that because we know that. It's that we knew they were corrupt and we fed the corruption, that we factored into the sustainment plan, the reality that 40, 50, 60% of the money we put in there wasn't going to where it needed to be. It was going into other places. And a lot of that, and that's why they aren't going to let this be investigated, a lot of that gets cycled back to us. It is
Intelligence,
money
politics.
laundering. It is corruption. It is,
Yep.
yeah.
It was believe me, they don't want anybody to start looking into that illegal crypto thing with the guy Sam Bankman-Fried dude, because all kind of dark intelligence money was going through that. You name it, they can't afford that. So at any rate,
And the
we
drugs,
know.
well, just to finish this, the drugs, the sex trafficking, the organ trafficking. I mean, literally the worst things that you can think about humanity is taking place in Ukraine today. The worst things about humanity is taking place in Ukraine, and we know it. We know this is happening. We know who is doing it, and we're not doing anything to stop it because we've bought into this Zelensky machine. The Zelensky machine is a criminal enterprise of the worst sort. The mayor of Ukraine,
Yeah.
there's reports coming out now about his role in sex trafficking. He literally lives in a building above two brothels that he runs. He uses the brothels to take in the widows and the daughters of service members who have died. And then he ends up using them in Ukraine as sex workers, or he sends them off to Europe, where they disappear into this underworld. I mean, if I'm Hollywood is Hollywood, but Liam Neeson did a movie, Taken.
Yep.
And that's real, people.
Yes,
that's real, and it's happening, and we're funding it, and we know this is why none of this will be allowed to come out in the open. And the American government's fingers are deep in this. I mean, someday I'd love to see Tony Blinken and Anthony Blinken
Sullivan,
and Lloyd Austin and Jake Sullivan testify, not before Congress, but before a grand jury, because in Congress you can still lie, and you do lie, before a grand jury, and admit what they knew, and when they knew it, and what they did about it, and how they covered it up. And they'll claim national security. There are things we had to do in the interest of national security, this, that, and the other thing. You don't cover up sex trafficking. You don't cover up, child sex slavery. You don't cover up drug trafficking. They've been covering up forever. Organ trafficking. This sort of thing. We treat the Ukrainians literally as meat, and we move them around as a commodity, not human beings. Remember that thing called empathy? The United States of America, the government, has lost all empathy for the Ukrainian people, and therefore that makes us evil.
Let's talk about what's happening on the front lines now. We've been, for the last couple of years, everybody's trying to figure out, when and what, and as you've said for a lot, we started off with various times, but now it's obvious that the Russians seem to have their own timeline, and there are times they could move faster, and you're like, gee, why are they moving? So it seems like it's kind of their timeline there, almost like a war of attrition. Like, slow is the way they do it. Even if they can move faster, they don't want to move faster. This is what they do. Seledovo, Toast. I mean, major hubs for transportation, moving of goods, etc. It seems to me that the Donbass region, I mean, of course, we don't have timelines. It seems like I don't know how the Ukrainian military is even able to defend it now. Your thoughts on what's happening, regarding the contact line and what seems to be a kind of a slow motion collapse. I'll put it this way, a controlled kind of demolition. It's the building 7 of war. Go ahead.
Oh, no, you went there.
Yeah, there we go. I thought that was a good joke. But anyway,
there's a Russian journalist that I follow a number of them, but one in particular, Murat Khairulin. He has a fantastic Substack. I recommend everybody subscribe to it. It's published in English. This is a guy who's on the front lines. He has great contacts, and when I say on the front lines, he's on the front lines. I mean, this is one of the braver people you'll ever meet in your life. And his graphics are done by a military cartographer. They're so good that the Russian army came to him and said, "You got to dumb it down a little bit, guys." Because, you're sort of giving away the farm here. We don't want you to do that. But they're very good graphics, and he describes what's going on. And I've spoken with him, and we correspond. There's Murat Khairulin Substack. If you guys are looking for a way to get a war update every morning, in 30 minutes or less, read his reporting. It's very valuable, spot on stuff. But the Russians, when we say the Russians are in control of the war, what it means is that virtually every battle that's fought is being fought in a way that's designed to maximize Ukrainian casualties and minimize Russian casualties. Now, things go bad. There's no doubt about that. There's bad commanders. I mean, I think we're finding out that the Russian army, 2.5 years into a brutal war, a very brutal war. If you don't, it's with any organization. If you don't supervise, if you don't rotate out, if you don't do sanity checks, and you just let people exist in an environment where life is cheap, life becomes meaningless. There are Russian commanders who perform poorly. There are Russian commanders who have become so inured to death that they stop doing the detailed planning necessary to minimize casualties on their part, and they get lazy and cruel and indifferent and criminally so. And so there are examples out there of just bad Russian leadership that leads to disastrous consequences for the men that they lead. But these are isolated incidents. By and large, the Russian military is very professional, and their way of fighting, they call it operational control. But when I was in the Marines, I had a Marine infantry battalion commander once tell me, what does my battalion intelligence officer do for me? The best intelligence I get comes from the tip of my bayonet, meaning that I only need to know what's right in front of me. I don't need to know what's going on beyond the hill, because I'm just here to close with and destroy. But now with communications and with drones, the Russians are systemically reducing Ukrainian defensive positions. When they assault with very specialized assault troops that are being directed forward as they go. The enemy is known, the enemy is located. They're being told where the enemy is. If the enemy repositions, they're being told that they're repositioning, and they are given instructions on how to maneuver close. It doesn't mean that there's no courage here. Always the final moments of the assault is, it's mano a mano, and the Russians do take casualties. But Murat says there's times now. There was times during the Battle of Avdiivka where they were taking unbelievable casualties. He says we don't take those kind of casualties anymore. We have wounded, but there's days where we will achieve major objectives and not lose a single person killed because of the way we are fighting this battle. Now, the Ukrainians, there was a period where they were flooding the war with drones, and these drones were a nightmare. I have two very good friends that were supplying the frontline region, and the drone. They saw the drone, and they had their shotguns, they had their rifles. They're trying to shoot the drone down, and at the end of the day, the drone got him. Didn't kill him, but wounded him pretty severely too. That's just the reality. I mean, these drones are, once you're in your sight. I mean, everybody's seen the videos. It's over, literally. If you can't kill the drone is going to kill you. And the Ukrainians were flooding the war zone with this, and it was causing the Russians very big problems. Not enough to stop the war, but problems the Russians. But the Russians, one of the great strengths of the Russian military is its ability to adapt. Drones are a weapon system. That means that the system needs to function in certain ways. There's communications involved. There's tactics involved. You have to be located in certain areas. When I was in the artillery, I worked very hard to come up with counter battery tactics and operations and the tools of the trade. And we used everything. I mean, from a simple crater analysis. You fire at me, I run out with my lance corporal. We stick a stick in the ground. We shoot the azimuth. We measure the angle. Then we run back and we plot it. And we get 3 of them. We can trisect where you're at and get a general location. We put out sensors to listen to the sound. And then the sensors we'd measure. We got good at determining how far away and what direction. So you'd fire a shell, the acoustic sensors would collect that, and then again triangulate in on on the target. We got radars out there that are collecting the stuff coming in, and all of this came together so that we could. Our job was to be able to, if you shot at us, we'll kill you before you can move. That was the goal. You shoot at us, I will have counter battery fire on you before you're done, before you can displace and kill you. That was the goal. That's the objective. And the Russians and Ukrainians have been engaged in this counter battery warfare for a long time. Both sides do it very well. The way they fight artillery now is completely different from what it was done in World War II and all that. Drones, the same thing. The Ukrainians brought in a lot of drone units, and they were just throwing drones out as expendable munitions. The Russians have broken the code. The Russians have figured out the Ukrainian tactics. One of the things you do in war is you template the battle. You look at the terrain, you look at capabilities, you look at goals, objectives, and you'll do what's called the intelligence preparation of the battlefield. You'll basically just start templating out the battlefield, where the lines of communication are, where the areas of terrain are masked in terms of observation and indirect fire. You look at the blind spots and all of this, and then you factor it in tactically how the enemy would perform, where they would perform, what they need to do, and you can begin to see what your fire support plan should look like. Well, the Russians have done this with the drones. They've figured out the communications, how the drones communicate, where the enemy needs to be, and then they put in their counter drone program. The most dangerous job in Ukraine today is drone operator. If you're operating a drone on the front line, you're going to die. That's just the reality. The Russians are going to kill you. You are the most hated person out there. The Russians will have no mercy with you. There's some stories of atrocities taking place where the Russians captured a drone unit that was very, there's always a backstory. And people say, well, why would the Russians shoot these prisoners of war? Well, that was the unit where, all the videos you have of Russians, crossing themselves and surrendering and say, hey, I'm wounded, don't kill me, but the drone comes in and kills them anyway. That was the unit that was doing it and bragging about it and publishing the videos. And the Russians collect everything. And they got these guys, they identified who they were, they saw the videos on their phones, and they killed them. I'm not condoning it. I'm just saying, if you're a drone operator on the Ukrainian side, you're, from the Russian perspective, you're lower. The Russians, to show you they kill Ukrainians all the time. If a Ukrainian surrenders, puts his hands up and says, I surrender, the Russians will take a drone to him, deliver water, deliver medicine, and then have that drone guide the Ukrainian to the Russian lines where that Ukrainian can be processed and surrendered. That's the Russian way of doing business right now. They don't always do it, but if you're surrendering, the Russians aren't going to be killing you. The Ukrainians are killing everything, every Russian they can get. And as a result, the Russians just despise these people.